Hi lovelies, welcome to Vintage Mike Tales. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Your love and support make these stories possible, and I can't wait to share this next journey with you. So grab a seat, take a deep breath, and let's step into a world full of love, hope, and unforgettable moments. The neon lights of Las Vegas blinked like restless hearts, loud, bright, pretending to be alive while hiding something hollow underneath. Olivia Patrick sat alone at the corner of a glittering rooftop bar, a half-finished margarita sweating on the table before her. Music pulsed in the distance, laughter rising from a sea of strangers celebrating nothing in particular. It was the kind of night meant for forgetting. But she couldn't forget. Not the church filled with flowers, not the empty aisle, not the phone call that shattered her future 2 weeks ago. Her cousin's bachelorette party was supposed to be a distraction, but watching happy couples dance and kiss made her stomach turn. Her reflection in the glass caught her off guard. Smoky eyes, red lips, a woman pretending she hadn't been left at the altar. "You're doing great," she lied to herself, lifting her glass in a quiet toast. "Here's to men. May they all trip over their own egos." The woman sitting beside her chuckled, overhearing, but Olivia didn't care. A few drinks in, and her carefully controlled grief was unraveling. The memory of her drunken viral rant still haunted her, 500,000 views of her screaming into a camera that love was a lie and men were parasites. Now her followers called her the anti-love bride. She wished she could delete herself. Across the bar, Dennis Scott watched her. He recognized pain when he saw it. He'd worn that same look lately, half proud, half defeated. The expression of someone watching everything they built collapse. Once the world called him the heart of New Orleans, the man who gave millions to rebuild neighborhoods after the storm. Now headlines painted him as a traitor. Dennis Scott pulls all philanthropic funding, the tycoon who turned his back. No one cared that he did it to save his employees' salaries. No one cared that the company was bleeding. He took another sip of whiskey, wishing it burned more. He wasn't supposed to be here. He hated Vegas, too loud, too fake, but his best friend had dragged him to a stag party. "Come on, D," his friend had said earlier. "Forget business for one night. You've been working yourself to death." And now here he was, sitting in silence, while a woman with tired eyes stole his attention, more effectively than the showgirls ever could. Their paths crossed when the bartender mixed up their orders. She reached for what she thought was her drink, just as he did. Their fingers brushed. "Sorry," she muttered, her voice soft but raw. "Didn't mean to steal your drink. Guess I'm just stealing mistakes tonight." He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I should thank you." "I'm trying to quit whiskey," she snorted. "You don't look like a man who quits anything." He tilted his head, intrigued. "And you don't look like a woman who drinks alone." "Trust me," she said, eyes darting back to the skyline. "Alone is safer." He wanted to ask why, but something in her tone told him the answer would hurt. They talked at first with sarcasm, the kind strangers used to hide their stories. But soon the conversation softened. She told him her name was Olivia. He told her his was Dennis. She didn't recognize him, the media villain from New Orleans. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, she wasn't trying to impress anyone, and that felt good. The conversation flowed easier than either expected. Words tumbled out, fragments of frustration, pain, and dark humor. Dennis spoke of the pressure, the media hate, the fear of losing everything. Olivia shared pieces of her heartbreak, the embarrassment, the furious, messy social media meltdown. Each confession was a small cut of honesty, shared with someone who understood the sting of being misjudged by the world. At some point, tears welled in her eyes. "You ever feel like the whole world's watching you fall apart? And you're expected to smile for the camera?" Dennis stared into his drink. "Every damn day." They exchanged a look that said, "I see you. Not your fame. Not your mask. You." The alcohol blurred their pain, made the world softer. By midnight, they were both intoxicated, not just on alcohol, but on the odd magnetic connection that had formed between them. When Dennis suggested retreating to his hotel room to escape the noise, Olivia agreed, not knowing if it was courage or recklessness driving her. When they stood to leave, she swayed. He caught her by the arm, steadying her. "Easy there." "I'm fine," she muttered, but her voice cracked. I'm not fine." The room was dimly lit, shadows pooling in the corners. Music from the casino floor seeped through the thick walls, a dull thrum against the charged silence between them. Dennis leaned closer, his hand brushing a strand of her hair from her face, eyes soft and searching. Their bodies were close, and the air between them was electric. He was about to kiss her when something in her shifted. Olivia's chest heaved. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her voice breaking as she whispered almost desperately, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve love, or kindness, or even—" She choked, pressing her hands against her face. When she looked up at him, her eyes were wide, raw, and pleading. "Dennis, I need you to roughen me up. I don't deserve anything good. My body, it deserves punishment. Just do it." Dennis froze, the words hitting him like a punch. His pulse raced. But his mind was clear. He would never harm her. Not like that, not ever. His instinct screamed at him to comfort, to protect, to wipe away her pain. But nothing could justify crossing the line she asked for. "For Olivia," he said carefully, his voice low and steady, trying to reach her through the storm of despair in her eyes. "No, I will never hurt you. Not like that, not ever. That's not what you deserve. That's not what anyone deserves." Her shoulders shook violently as sobs tore through her. "But I'm the worst. I'm broken. I can't be loved." Her voice cracked, raw and desperate, echoing through the small hotel room. Then came the moment she couldn't hold back. She vomited, overwhelmed by the alcohol, the shame, and the emotional flood. Without hesitation, Dennis acted. He stepped closer, gently guiding her away from the edge of the bed, removing her clothes, grabbing a towel, and wiping her face with careful precision. He helped her lie down, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. "I've got you," he murmured, brushing damp curls from her temple. "You're safe. That's all that matters right now. Nothing else. Not your body, not your mistakes. Just you, alive, breathing, safe." Olivia's body shook as tears streamed down her cheeks. But the fear and self-loathing that had consumed her began to soften, just slightly, in the steady presence of a man who could have exploited her vulnerability, but chose compassion instead. He sat beside her until her breathing slowed. She looked like a fallen star, brilliant once, now dimmed by heartbreak. Dennis brushed a loose curl from her cheek and whispered, "You don't deserve pain, Olivia. You deserve someone who stays." He didn't touch her again. He just sat there in silence, listening to her sleep, feeling something unfamiliar stir in him, a kind of gentleness he thought he'd lost. The city outside still roared with laughter, but inside the room it was quiet. For the first time in months, Dennis didn't feel the weight of headlines, board meetings or failing numbers, just the stillness of a moment that reminded him what being human felt like. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her muffled sobs echoed in his mind. Two strangers, both broken in different ways, had collided by accident, but it didn't feel accidental anymore. As dawn began to stretch its light across the curtains, he turned his head toward her and whispered to the morning air, "Maybe we were meant to meet in our ruins, so we could remember how to rebuild." And with that thought, Dennis Scott, the man the world called heartless, closed his eyes, not knowing that this woman sleeping in his bed would one day save not just his company but his soul. The first thing Olivia noticed when she woke up was the light, soft and too forgiving for the chaos inside her head. Her mouth was dry. Her temples throbbed. Her stomach rolled like a boat in a storm. Then came the panic. She wasn't in her hotel room. The sheets were too fine, the scent too masculine, cedarwood and clean linen. She shot upright, her heart pounding. The room was unfamiliar, sleek, modern, with a half-empty whiskey bottle on the nightstand and a suit jacket hanging carelessly on the chair. Her mind scrambled through flashes of memory, the rooftop bar, the man with kind eyes, the laughter that had turned into tears, then blackness. Her hands trembled as she looked down at herself. She was in a white robe. Someone else's. "Oh God," she whispered. "What did I do?" "Relax," came a voice from the balcony. She turned, startled. Dennis stood there, shirtless in the morning light, holding a cup of coffee. His eyes were calm, steady, nothing like the predatory smirk she feared. "I didn't touch you," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "You threw up on yourself." I cleaned you up and let you sleep. That's all. Her throat tightened. Shame and confusion battled inside her. I'm sorry. I must have said things. You said a lot of things, he said with a faint smile, setting the cup down. Mostly that men are terrible and should be banned from breathing. Despite herself, Olivia let out a small, embarrassed laugh. Sounds like me. He shrugged lightly. Don't worry, I've heard worse. Some of it was true. The silence stretched, filled with the faint hum of the city below. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, staring out the window. I made a complete fool of myself, didn't I? Dennis leaned against the doorframe, watching her with something that wasn't pity, something gentler. No, you were just honest, maybe too honest. But you were hurting. She turned to face him, eyes glossy. And you, why were you there? You looked like a man trying to disappear. He hesitated, then sighed. Maybe I was. My company's bleeding money. People hate me. I thought Vegas might make me forget for a night. Did it? He smiled sadly. Not even close. Olivia's gaze softened. Then we're both running from something. Seems that way. He offered her a mug of coffee. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a spark she didn't expect, a pulse of warmth. Not desire, but recognition. They sat at the small dining table, two strangers nursing caffeine and regret. Olivia stared at the steam rising from her cup. I used to believe in love so much it scared people. I planned my whole life around it. The wedding, the vows, the promises. Her voice wavered. He left me standing there. No explanation. Just a note saying he wasn't ready. Dennis looked down. Maybe he didn't deserve the kind of love you were ready to give. She met his eyes, startled by the quiet conviction in his tone. You don't even know me. He smiled faintly. Sometimes it doesn't take knowing a person to recognize their kind of pain. That line hit her harder than it should have. Hours passed. What began as small talk turned into stories about growing up in New Orleans, about dreams that got tangled with disappointments. Dennis talked about his company, how he built it from the ground up, how the world now called him selfish for cutting his charity programs to keep it alive. I used to care what they thought, he said quietly. But when your name becomes a headline, people stop seeing you as human. Olivia studied him. There was no arrogance in his words, only exhaustion. You're not heartless, Dennis. You're just tired. He chuckled softly. That's generous of you. She shrugged. It's true. People love tearing others down. It makes their own misery easier to swallow. Dennis leaned forward. You talk like someone who's been torn down too. Her eyes glistened. Maybe that's why I recognized the look. For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, like the beginning of something neither of them could name. Later that morning, as she packed her things to leave, Dennis stood near the door. You should eat before you go. Hangovers are cruel. She smiled faintly. Thanks for everything. For not taking advantage, he finished gently. That's not who I am. Olivia nodded. I guess that makes you rare. He chuckled softly. Rare doesn't mean perfect, just trying not to add more brokenness to the world. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. I don't usually meet people who mean what they say. Then maybe this time, he said, his voice low and sincere. You were meant to. Their eyes held, long enough to stir something dangerous and tender all at once. 2 weeks later, Olivia sat in a conference room in New Orleans, heart racing. Her cousin's husband had pulled some strings to land her a temporary consulting job for a struggling corporation. She needed the distraction. She needed the money. She straightened her blazer, clutching the file. New Orleans Restoration Group. The board members filed in. Then came the CEO, Dennis Scott. He froze mid-step, the recognition flashing in his eyes. Olivia, he said almost to himself. Her mouth went dry. You've got to be kidding me. The room fell silent, awkward and curious. Dennis composed himself quickly, gesturing to an empty chair. Everyone, this is Olivia Patrick, our new consultant. His voice was steady, but his eyes said more. She sat down, pretending to focus on the papers, her pulse thrumming in her ears. During the meeting, he barely looked at her. Yet every word he said carried a subtle weight, as if aware of the secret only they shared. That one strange night in Vegas, where they'd met as broken strangers. When the meeting ended, he caught up to her outside the conference room. Olivia, he said softly. This city isn't Vegas. You don't have to run this time. She hesitated. And you don't have to save me. He smiled gently. Maybe we can just help each other breathe again. Her eyes softened, but her defenses stayed firm. I'm not ready to trust any man, Dennis. He nodded, his voice a whisper. Then let me show you there are still a few worth trusting. And as she walked away, Dennis watched her, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in months, Hope didn't feel like a stranger. The air in New Orleans carried its own kind of melody, humid, soulful and restless. It was a city that remembered pain and turned it into art. And somehow that's exactly what Olivia Patrick was doing for Dennis Scott's crumbling empire. 3 weeks had passed since that awkward first meeting. Olivia now walked through the halls of Scott Enterprises with quiet determination, her confidence returning little by little. Numbers and ideas were her escape, the one thing she could control when her heart still felt uncertain. Dennis watched her from his glass office, sometimes forgetting he was supposed to be working. She had this way of commanding attention without asking for it. Calm, composed, thoughtful. The woman who once wept in his arms in a Vegas suite was now standing before executives, fixing what even he couldn't. He couldn't help but admire her, not just for her brilliance, but for her courage to show up again in a world that had broken her. Your problem isn't the market, Olivia said during a strategy meeting one morning, pointer in hand, her voice steady and clear. It's your image. The world thinks Dennis Scott abandoned the people. We need to show them he didn't, that he saved what he could. The board murmured in agreement. Dennis leaned back, watching her with quiet awe. Meaning? One of the directors asked. Transparency, Olivia replied. Host community town halls. Reintroduce your charity arm, but this time, let the employees be the face. People trust stories, not statements. Dennis smiled faintly. You really believe they'll listen again? She met his gaze. They will if you speak with your heart. People don't forgive arrogance, but they do forgive sincerity. That sentence hung in the air like music. When the meeting ended, Dennis followed her out. You make it sound easy, he said. It's not, Olivia replied, tucking her tablet into her bag. But you can't fix what you don't face. The world didn't hate you for failing. They hated you for hiding. He stopped walking. You're not afraid to tell me the truth, are you? She looked up at him, unflinching. You don't need another person pretending everything's fine. Dennis smiled. Then maybe you're exactly what I needed. Something flickered in her eyes, that same warmth she tried to suppress. She turned away quickly, but he caught the smallest hint of a blush before she walked off. Over the following months, everything began to change. The company slowly clawed its way back from the brink. Olivia's plans worked. Open community sessions, transparent reporting renewed trust. The same media outlets that once mocked, Dennis now hailed him as the tycoon who listened. At one press event, a journalist asked Dennis what caused his change of heart. He paused, glanced at Olivia standing near the stage, and said quietly into the mic, Someone reminded me that redemption isn't found in profit. It's found in honesty. Olivia's throat tightened as the crowd applauded. She looked down, pretending not to notice his gaze lingering on her. Later that night, they stayed late at the office, papers scattered, laughter spilling over takeout boxes. You know, Dennis said, leaning back in his chair, you've completely hijacked my company. Olivia smiled faintly. You hired me to save it. Consider it rescued. He watched her quietly for a moment. You've done more than save my company, Olivia. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. Don't, she whispered. Don't make this about anything else. He leaned forward. Why not? You're the only person who sees me without judgment. Do you know how rare that is? She met his gaze, her walls trembling. Dennis, I can't. You don't have to say anything, he interrupted softly. Just don't run yet. Her eyes softened, torn between fear and longing. You're kind. That's what makes this dangerous. Kind men make you forget how to protect yourself. He reached across the desk, brushing his fingers against hers. And cruel men make you forget how to love. I'd rather remind you of the latter. The air thickened, charged, tender, full of unspoken confessions. But Olivia gently pulled her hand away. Not tonight, she murmured. He smiled faintly, sadness hidden in the curve of his lips. Then I'll wait. I have time. The waiting didn't stop his heart from falling. Days turned into weeks. Their friendship deepened. Late-night coffee runs, morning strategy sessions. quiet moments that felt too intimate to be professional. One evening, a storm rolled through the city, lightning flashing against the tall windows of Dennis's mansion. Olivia had stayed behind to finalize a presentation. When the power went out, the office fell into a soft, golden glow from the emergency lights. "Looks like we're trapped," she said, half laughing. Dennis poured 2 glasses of wine. "Then I guess it's not the worst way to end the night." They sat by the window, the rain painting streaks down the glass. "I used to love storms," Olivia whispered. "They made me feel safe, like the world was cleansing itself. But now they just remind me of how quickly things can change." Dennis studied her face, every flicker of pain behind her words. "Maybe storms aren't meant to destroy, Olivia. Maybe they're meant to wash away what no longer serves us." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering. "You always talk like that. Like your heart is some kind of poetry." He smiled softly. "Maybe it's just been through enough to know what matters." There was silence, the kind that hums with meaning. She exhaled shakily. "You make it sound so easy to believe again." He set down his glass and took her hand gently. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. And if you can't believe in love yet, then believe in me." Her lip trembled. "Dennis, let me be the proof that love doesn't hurt," he whispered. The words broke her. Tears welled as she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The storm outside raged louder, wind howling like it carried their ghosts away. He didn't kiss her at first. He just held her hand, letting her feel the steadiness in his touch, something unshaken, patient, real. And then when she finally looked up, her eyes met his in quiet surrender. The kiss that followed wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, trembling, healing, full of everything they'd been too afraid to say. When she pulled back, her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm scared, Dennis." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "Then let's be scared together." She laughed softly through her tears. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe love is simple," he said. "We just complicate it with fear." That night, Olivia didn't sleep much. She replayed his words over and over, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Dennis, on the other hand, stood by the window long after she left. The city lights shimmered below, rain easing into a soft drizzle. He whispered to himself, smiling faintly, "She doesn't know it yet, but she's saving me." And somewhere between the sound of thunder and the faint scent of her perfume, lingering in his home, Dennis Scott realized that his empire wasn't the only thing Olivia Patrick had resurrected. She'd brought his heart back to life. The morning light spilled across the New Orleans skyline like liquid gold, and from his penthouse balcony, Dennis Scott watched the city come alive, street musicians tuning trumpets, vendors calling out along Royal Street, the distant rumble of the St. Charles streetcar. The world felt different now, lighter, brighter, alive again. He sipped his coffee and smiled faintly. His company was thriving. His reputation, once in ruins, had been reborn. The media now called him the redeemed tycoon, a man who turned scandal into second chances. But none of it, not the awards nor the applause, compared to the real miracle, Olivia Patrick. She had walked into his life when he'd been at his lowest, turned chaos into strategy, and rebuilt his empire with the sheer brilliance of her mind. But what amazed him more than her intelligence was her heart, cautious, scarred but endlessly kind. He had fallen in love with her quietly, then completely. Dennis looked over his shoulder toward the kitchen. Olivia was there, barefoot, wearing one of his shirts, and humming softly as she poured herself a cup of tea. The sight made his chest ache with affection. "How are you always so calm in the mornings?" he teased. "Because one of us has to be sane before the markets open." She replied with a soft smile. He chuckled. Touché. They'd fallen into a rhythm, late-night strategizing, early mornings spent sharing quiet breakfasts, laughter breaking the silence that used to haunt his home. But even with all the warmth between them, Dennis noticed the distance that lingered in her eyes. Sometimes that unspoken fear she carried like a shadow. Later that day, in the glass conference room of Scott Holdings, Olivia stood before a group of executives. Her presentation was sharp, flawless, visionary, the kind of strategy that made people lean forward and take notes. Dennis sat at the end of the table, watching her with quiet admiration. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. One of the executives said, "Miss Patrick, your direction saved this company." You've given Scott Holdings its second life. Olivia smiled graciously, but her eyes flickered briefly toward Dennis, a look filled with meaning and restraint. He returned it with pride, but deep inside something told him she was drifting. After the meeting, she handed him a folder. Here are the finalized projections for next quarter. I think you'll like what you see. I always do, Dennis said, searching her face. But you've been quiet lately. Is everything okay? She hesitated. Yeah, just tired, I guess. He frowned. You're not just tired. You're pulling away. Dennis, she started, but her voice faltered. Please don't. He reached out and touched her hand gently. Olivia, you can tell me anything. Her eyes softened for a moment, but then she looked away. Not this time. That evening, while Dennis attended a charity gala, Olivia sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. On her laptop, an email draft glowed at the top of the screen. Subject, resignation letter. Her heart pounded as she read the words again. Dennis, working with you has been one of the greatest experiences of my life. But I need to step away for me. I'm accepting a new position in Chicago. Please understand this has nothing to do with you, only my need to start fresh. Olivia. Her hand trembled on the trackpad. She thought of the night in Vegas, the broken woman crying in his arms. She thought of the mornings he made her laugh when she wanted to cry, the nights he stayed up late rewriting proposals, just because she believed they could win. She loved him. God, she loved him. But the love terrified her. Dennis was safe, gentle, real, and that was exactly why she couldn't stay. The last time she'd trusted love, it had left her humiliated, broken, and afraid to believe again. She couldn't bear to risk her heart, only to lose everything once more. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she hit send. The next morning, Dennis arrived at the office early. He found her resignation letter waiting in his inbox. He froze. His heart thudded once, then twice, hard, sharp beats that knocked the breath out of him. He read it again, disbelief tightening his chest. She was leaving, Chicago, starting fresh. Dennis didn't think. He just moved, grabbing his keys, his jacket, his phone. His pulse roared in his ears as he ran down the marble steps and out into the blinding New Orleans sunlight. He called her once, twice. No answer. Then her text came through. I'm sorry, Dennis. Please don't come. He ignored it. He knew her too well. When Olivia ran, it wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she cared too much. He drove like a man possessed. The city blurring past him, streetcars, palm-lined boulevards, the metallic scent of rain in the air. He reached the airport just as she was checking in her luggage. Olivia, he shouted. She froze. Her heart knew his voice before her mind could react. When she turned, he was already striding toward her, breathless. Eyes wild, desperation etched across his face. Dennis, what are you doing here? She whispered, startled. He stopped in front of her, voice trembling. You weren't going to say goodbye? I couldn't, she said softly. If I did, I wouldn't have left. Then don't, he said. Dennis, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Don't run because you're scared, Olivia. We started broken, yes, but we built something beautiful out of it. Don't throw that away because you think you don't deserve it. Her eyes shimmered. You don't understand. Every time I've trusted love, it's ended in pain. I can't go through that again. Dennis's voice cracked. And what about me? You think I wasn't terrified when you walked into my life? You think I didn't question every second of falling for you? He reached for her hand, his eyes pleading. But I chose you anyway. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. Olivia's tears spilled freely now. Dennis, I don't know how to trust anymore. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. Then trust me one day at a time. That's all I'm asking. One day, then the next, until the fear isn't stronger than the love. She shook her head weakly, but her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he whispered, voice breaking. It's just worth it. The airport noise faded around them. The overhead announcements, the rolling suitcases, the chatter, all melted into silence as they stood there, two souls finally facing their truth. Then quietly Olivia whispered, I love you, Dennis. I've loved you since the night you refused to touch me when you could have. You saw me at my worst and still made me feel worthy. Dennis's breath trembled. Then stay. She dropped her bag. I already have. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though the world might end if he let go. Around them, people smiled. Some clapped softly. But for Dennis and Olivia, the moment belonged only to them. Months later, the air in New Orleans was thick with jasmine and warmth. In a private garden filled with fairy lights and white roses, Olivia Patrick became Mrs. Olivia Scott. The ceremony was intimate. Elegant, close friends, family, and a few reporters who promised discretion. The same media that once crucified Dennis now called him the redeemed tycoon with the heart that found home. Olivia's gown was simple lace, her curls loose, her eyes shining as she walked down the aisle. Dennis stood waiting beneath an arch of magnolias, his smile trembling with emotion. When she reached him, she whispered, "I almost ran again." He grinned softly. "I would have just chased you again." The guests laughed, but when Dennis took her hands, the world quieted. "You once told me you didn't know how to trust again," he said softly, "and I told you I'd wait, one day at a time. Well, those days brought me here, Olivia, to this moment, to you." Tears glistened in her eyes. "You never gave up on me, because loving you was never something I wanted to survive," he said, voice shaking. "It's something I wanted to live for." The officiant smiled gently. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was slow, deep, and full of everything they had fought through: heartbreak, forgiveness, and rebirth. As the guests applauded, the golden light of sunset bathed them in warmth. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that what happens in Vegas shouldn't always stay there?" Dennis chuckled. "No, sometimes it follows you home and turns into forever." He kissed her forehead, his voice a whisper against her skin. "And this is my forever. We met in our ruin. We fell in love while rebuilding. And somewhere between the pain and forgiveness, we found home." As the newlyweds swayed beneath the New Orleans twilight, laughter and jazz weaving through the air as if even the city itself was celebrating their redemption. Because sometimes what happens in Vegas doesn't need to stay there. Sometimes it becomes forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you that love, hope, and second chances are always possible. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue exploring more unforgettable tales together. Until next time, keep your heart open and your dreams alive. Vintage Mike Tales.